Great. Thank you. So I'll start with the very basic information. What are your qualifications?
You want the highest or the...
Well, everything you have.
I'm a teacher by training. Started with diploma in secondary school teaching. I went to university and did bachelor's degree in education, English and literature. Then I started a master's program with the Gamashot Institute, Peace and Conflict Studies. I'm yet to graduate.
Okay. What department are you in?
Committee department, this very department.
Okay. And what is your position?
Committee clerk.
Okay. What are your responsibilities?
Basically, I'm secretary to the committee, and you can be assigned any committee.
Okay.
And right now, I'm secretary to the committee on national security and foreign affairs. Previously, I've dealt with education and information.
Generally, what would your comment be about the Zambian governance system?
In terms of what?
Just your general comment on the governance system in Zambia.
That's a trick one, because I don't know whether you're looking for whether it is good or bad. What exactly are you looking for?
I do not want to ask you whether it's good or bad. I want you to give me what your general comment is. What not whether it's good
the way government runs, or
just the governance, because of course governance is more than just government. So it involves a number of things, including government, but also the processes, the decisions, the people. So mainly that's what I mean.
That's a complex one. If you talk about how decisions are made, or of course you have the executive as the policy-making body. You have the judiciary, you have the legislature, which is what we are. The legislature makes laws. Of course, the executive are the initiators of the laws, but they bring them to parliament for enactment. And then the other arm is the judiciary. And these three are expected to be independent of each other.
Okay.
Whether that is true in practice, it's difficult to say, but that is what they are meant to be. They're supposed to be independent.
Okay. Why is it difficult to say whether they are actually really independent?
Well, the difficulty is, for instance, the policymakers are government, and if they are saying we want this policy, which must be translated into law, then the ministry drafts that law, which must come to parliament. And parliament now, of course, the Minister of Justice puts it in the legal language. So the sponsor is the ministry, and they are saying we want to achieve this by this. And so then the legal minds will craft it in their legal language. Then it comes to parliament, and parliament enacts that law, which is now must become for everyone to obey. Yeah, so it is a fluid situation where the influence on each other, particularly on the executive and the legislature, is very difficult to determine. Maybe between the judiciary and the other two arms, it might be a bit easy. But between the executive and the legislature, it's very hard, particularly because in the House you have members of the executive who are also members of parliament. So they are doing both the policy and the enactment of laws.
Okay.
Yeah, so that becomes a very fluid relationship.
Okay. Looking back 10 years ago, what do you think has changed over the years in terms of government?
I think there's more democracy now, and people are speaking out on a lot of issues than they used to maybe 10 years before. And so because of those checks and balances, government is alert to what they do. We have had a lot of constitutional changes since then. And I think we are getting better.
Okay. In a democracy, we say that people are at the center of the rule. Do you think that this applies to Zambia?
Yes, it does.
How do you
I
feel
mean, there are different varieties of democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it's all democracy as long as the will of the people is upheld. Actually, in constitutionalism, they talk about the sovereignty of the people's will, meaning that the people's will takes precedence over any other arm of government. If you're making a constitution, the sovereign will of the people must be respected. So in that respect, we would say, yes.
So it is being respected in the country.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you see? What do you think are obstacles to democracy?
Several factors.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on what the government wants to achieve, because the implementers of democracy are obviously government. And so if the political will, it depends on how much political will there is.
Mm-hmm.
That is what enhances democracy.
Mm-hmm.
And so no matter how much the people push, if there's no political will, nothing happens. So political will is very important.
What do you know about the Access to Information Bill?
Well, I know that the first time this bill was talked about was in 2002. In fact, it was moved by, it was actually a private member's motion, which government took over in 2002. It came to Parliament, and it was withdrawn at, I think, the second reading stage. Because government felt that there needed to be more consultation on a lot of issues. And from 2002 to date, there has been, moving forward and back on this matter, because government has always maintained that they are still consulting. Civil society has pushed and is still pushing that we must have this law. And so, between 2002 and to date, that bill has not come back to Parliament. And government keeps saying we are consulting.
What does access to information mean to you? Or rather, accessing information, what does it mean?
It has a lot of facets. There is access of information on the government side, access to information on the public, access to information in the media. And in each of those three, it means different things. But when it comes to access to information from the government side, you are saying government must have access to your information as a citizen. Meaning that if there are any records about you, government must know that. If you take the example of SIM registration, for instance, it is a requirement that if you are going to communicate within the country, you have to have your SIM registered. And so that gives government some access to your personal data. Okay? But if you are expecting access to information on the government, then you are saying if you ask for any information on policy, on what government is doing, then government is required to give you that information because they are holding it on your behalf. It is actually believed that government holds this information on behalf of the citizens, and so they should be able to give it to you when you need it, as long as it doesn't border on the security of the country. Yeah. The media, likewise, needs to have information, and it should not be information that should be very difficult to get. Yeah, I mean, if you are looking for information, and in fact it removes a lot of suspicion, if it is volunteered, other than when it is asked for, meaning that the government has a responsibility to update the media on what is happening. Normally, when it is the other way around, there is a lot of apprehension, because then the government begins to say, why are they asking for this information? And that creates some tension. There's a monkey there. Close the window. So that is what creates the problem.
Okay.
But on both cases, in both cases, there is they have a responsibility to give and to obtain information. But there is a responsibility to be, what is the word? That information obtained is not used to destroy anybody. And normally the apprehension, especially between the media and the government, has been that whatever information the media gets is meant to destroy them, particularly if it is the private media. So and that has been a standoff between the media and the government.
Do you think that you mentioned that it was started in 2002? Do you think that the reason of consultation is justified enough to not have the bill returned to Parliament in 14 years?
Not necessarily. I think there is actually a quotation. Tony Blair has been quoted to say, the biggest mistake I ever made when I was Prime Minister is to assent to the Access to Information Law. And he says it's like you have a hammer. It's like you have a mallet. You know what a mallet is? A mallet is softer than a hammer. Okay, and then you tell the media or the journalists, instead of using the mallet, let me give you the hammer so that you can hammer me on my head. Okay, so he actually says it was a big mistake because whatever information that has been provided to the media has not been used for the intended purpose. So I think that the what's the word? The reluctance is not necessarily about consultation. It's just about whether it will be safe to go that direction because of what has happened elsewhere. In Uganda, for instance, Uganda was one of the few countries in Africa to pass that law. And each of those countries that have gone that direction seem to be regretting that they ever did what they did. And so then the apprehension is, if other countries are regretting, why should we venture into it? Otherwise we'll bring trouble on ourselves. I think that is the fear.
So those seem like they're more of, would I say negatives or lessons learned, but from these countries that have actually, that you are citing, have they not then experienced more transparency, more accountability in terms of their processes and decisions?
I think it is dependent on how mature the recipients of that information are. Maybe the fear is that for our purposes, maybe we have not gotten to a level where we can entrust such information to the public. Yeah, because wherever it has been experimented, there's a feeling that that information is misused. Yeah, so the lessons learned don't seem to be very positive. Yeah, and because of that, there's some hesitancy in going that route.
Okay. Do you think citizens should have access to information?
They should. It is actually a must. As a matter of fact, there's no way we can talk about democracy without access to information. Because because what it entails, in fact, the proposed Bill of Rights, which failed in the referendum, actually proposes that should be a right for citizens. It's a period failed, but it's actually there in the Bill of Rights. And if citizens don't have access to information, and the state doesn't have access to information by private institutions, then the governance becomes very tricky. So, if even when you talk about sustainable development, people have always complained about the top-down of doing things. The Millennium Development Goals are actually said to have failed because they took the top-down approach, and they are trying now to say, from the Sustainable Development Goal, let's begin from bottom up. And so if citizens don't have information about what the government is doing, then there's mistrust. There are examples of projects that have failed because citizens didn't see the value for them. Why? Because they were not consulted. There's a story of a place where they built, they did boreholes, And they didn't ask the people whether they want to continue to go to the river or to have boreholes. So when they built those boreholes and they saw that the women were still going to the river, then they began to ask why. Until the women said, that's where we go to gossip. So if you bring boreholes nearby, we have no reason to go far away to go and talk. Meaning that if they were consulted, they would have told them, we don't need boreholes here, we have a river with a lot of water. Okay, so that tells you that if you don't consult the recipients of what you are doing, you might actually be doing something they don't want.
Okay. Tell me about the process of coming up with a bill.
Very difficult for me, like I said earlier, because what we receive here is a bill already done.
Okay.
But what government does, like I was saying, if government was to treat an ill, if there's something the government wants to correct, okay? For instance, we're talking about the Ministry of Information. If there's something they want to cure in the media, then they'll say, this is what we want to do, okay? Then they'll go to the ministry. The ministry will put it in policy form. This is what we want to do. And that, I'm telling you a layman's thing, but the people can give you adequate information on that. A means of justice, how they do. But what I know is that an idea comes from the ministry. We call it the sponsoring ministry, which tells the Minister of Justice, this is what we want to do. Then the Minister of Justice will put that desire or that expression of interest, of intent, in the legal language, which will be captioned in what is called a cabinet memo, cabinet memorandum, which now goes to cabinet for cabinet to approve. When cabinet gives a go-ahead, then that goes back to Minister of Justice. Then he says it is approved, it can go. Then Minister of Justice puts it into a bill, which comes now to Parliament. At that stage, it is published. It is a requirement that is published in the Government Gazette and things like that. And so when it comes here, then it's already a bill when it comes here.
Okay.
In other words, we have no input as Parliament in how a bill was arrived at.
Okay.
The only thing we do is that when a bill comes here, then we look at who does it affect. And those people are the ones now we call as witnesses or stakeholders to come and say how it impacts on their activities. Yeah, then that is after it has been read in the House. Then we compile those views and put it into a report, which government then must consider.
Okay. So your involvement with the Access to Information Bill, that should have been at the point where it's been made a law and it comes to you.
It's not yet a law.
Yes.
It is a bill, and a bill is an expression of intent by government.
Okay.
So, for instance, on this bill, the Access to Information Bill, government, before the bill comes here, will have consulted whoever they think are interested parties in that bill. Okay? Then they'll put in the things they think must be in that bill. So when it comes here now, because now Parliament must have the final word. In fact, when it becomes an act, they even call it an act of Parliament. Whoever promulgated it, whoever formulated it is even forgotten, because now it becomes a baby of Parliament. So at that stage, it's a bill. It's not yet a law. It is only a law when the president assents to it. But it becomes an act at that point. So when that thing comes here, like I was saying, then the committee, it is referred to a relevant committee. If it is to do with information, it will come to the Committee on Information. If it is to do with national security, it will come to the Committee on National Security. Then when those people who are interested, who that bill affects, are called, they will come and say, we don't like this, or this was omitted, we like this included. That is put in a report, which the committee now takes to the main house. Now the main house begins to talk about that report. They'll be discussing the bill. And if there's need, for instance, to amend a clause or part of the bill, then government will be told. The committee now will say this must be amended. Or in the house, when everyone else is debating, they'll say the committee has recommended this amendment. And if the majority agree that it must be amended, then the ministry responsible we'll be asked to bring an amendment. That's okay. We're asked to bring an amendment. Now at another stage, which is called committee stage. Now they'll begin to go through each clause. And if at some point there is an amendment to be made, if they say clause 20 for instance, any amendment, then the ministry will say we have an amendment to make. And it is amended at that point. And when it passes that stage, then it is sent to the president. When the president assents, now there's no amendment. It is now an act.
Okay. So you haven't been involved yet in this process?
We don't even hope to be involved. Which one do you think?
Of the Access to Information Bill?
No.
Okay.
I've just read about it.
Okay.
Yeah, because I found that history. And there was a moment we even attempted to go to countries which had enacted this law. Yeah.
Okay. So are you aware of any actors, any coalitions that were formed around it?
Yes, I think there was a coalition. What was it called? There was a 10-member coalition of journalists, and I don't know what the name is. I'm not sure about the name though. But there was a coalition. I think it was cited in one of the minutes. If you had given me prior information, I would have found that name. But there was a coalition of media houses. I think about 10 of them. They were. I think Panos was part of that, and this. Which other organization was that? We even had a workshop at some point in Taminuka. Action Aid. Yeah, Action Aid was part of that, the 10 institutional committee. So there has been a coalition actually to spearhead. They have been proposing to meet the president. In fact, I remember one of them even said the current president was their patron. I think it's Action Aid or Panos. And so they were hoping that now that he was head of state, he would enact this law. But it doesn't work alone.
Yeah.
It's a system.
Okay. Do you think that government, or rather how responsive do you think government has been to the views of other stakeholders in this process?
Well, that's a trick one. But like I said earlier, government is sort of guarded because of what they've seen other governments face. Yeah, because by now, if government had been responsive, the bill would have been law by now. But regardless of what the stakeholders have demanded, there's still that part which government is still guarding because they fear that it might open a Pandora's box. As you have noticed, many people that, like I said, with Tony Blair, and if Tony Blair can say that, and that's a very mature democracy where he regrets having passed that law. How about an African country where a lot of things are still being experimented upon? So that apprehension has made it difficult for government to respect or even adopt whatever the other coalitions or stakeholders have proposed.
Okay. In your opinion, what would you say are the main requirements to enact the bill?
Any bill or this particular one?
This particular bill.
First of all, the media must demonstrate responsibility because that is one of the biggest fears the government has. The media must demonstrate the responsibility that they can use that information constructively. And I think when government is convinced that the media can be entrusted with information and without breaking the nation, then we might have something coming. So I think all the three, I talked about the public, the government, and the media. We all, if I know something about you, for instance, for what intent do I know? What do I want to use what I know about you? So when those questions are answered, it might put the government at rest and probably go ahead and
Okay. And in relation to governance, what do you think are the important characteristics of a governance system that would support the existence of this Access to Information Bill?
It must be a very, very mature democracy. It must be a very, very mature democracy. And remember, there is nothing perfect as long as it is being done by human beings. There's no perfect democracy. Even in the US, they still have their own problems. But I think it's just where people just agree that this is the route we must go. So it means that the tenets of democracy must be very deeply entrenched in the society before we can come to this level. We must demonstrate that we are mature enough to handle each other without destroying each other, regardless of what we know about each other. So I think we need a government that is very transparent, very open door policy, that otherwise it's not possible.
Do you think we are far from that point of that mature democracy?
No, I'm not sure whether you can call it mature yet. Whereas we are making progress, it will be difficult to say we are mature. Very difficult, because there are some things that have happened that indicate that we are not really that mature. But we are making progress, but we have not yet reached the level where I would say we are a mature democracy.
Okay. And when you say some things that have happened, could you cite examples?
Well, with regard to access to information.
Well, you say there are some things that have happened that have indicated that we're not that mature yet.
Well, just the way we handle ourselves with regard to information, with regard to democracy, political parties, and things like that.
Okay.
Yeah. We are not tolerant. We don't want to, as long as you hold a different view, you are my enemy. And that's not how democracy operates. If you notice in the US, for instance, you have had Trump and Hillary debating on issues without insulting each other, not even fighting. Yeah, when you get to a level like that where we can differ in philosophy and views, but not differ as persons, then you might say we are heading somewhere.
Okay. And you also mentioned transparency and openness, open door policy. Do you think that we are at that level?
No. Actually, there have been a lot of complaints about that. Even when you go to get information, even just from the Ministry of Health, if you go there to get statistics about AIDS and things like that, there's this issue of, first of all, they'll ask you who you are, who has sent you, what you want that information for. Of course, that's a requirement. Even when there's access to information, there is a form that people are supposed to fill to indicate who they are, why they want that information, and things like that. But there's a situation where you keep being referred to. This one says go to the director, the other one says go to the payment secretary. And so people get so frustrated that in the end they just give up. And sometimes it's because those officers have been told this information you can't give. But if there's an open door policy already stated, you don't have to see the permanent secretary for such information to be released, because then the process of getting permission will be very short.
In your opinion, what sort of information should citizens be able to access once the bill is enacted?
Maybe the question should be what information shouldn't they be, because if you say what they should access, it is a myriad of things. It will be easier to deal with what they shouldn't access than what they should access.
Okay. So what shouldn't they access?
Yeah, the contention has been information that borders on national security. Everywhere, even where the access to information bill has been passed, there are certain exclusions as to what information a citizen or the press can get. And that is it must only be information that borders on national security. To the extent that if that information is released, it might be at the jeopardy of national security. But the problem now has become, even what is not national security is considered national security. And until we can, strictly use that word strictly, then we might be able to get it done. Because there has been a complaint that actually government ministries hide behind that national security issue.
And information that you say that is spoken as national security but actually isn't, what kind of information will this be? For
instance, there have been issues of I think my colleague will tell you, in the Public Accounts Committee, for instance, if the army buys beans, okay, and there are irregularities in buying that beans, and the Public Accounts Committee says the procedure in buying the beans was not followed, is there anything national security about buying beans? Okay, so if we are going to hide in that, then there's a problem, and that's what I mean. Okay. It's not everything that is done, for instance, in the military circles, that is national security. You know, whereas the institution is military, but not everything that is done there is military. Like the purchase of bread, for instance, for officers, the purchase of beans and things like that. There must be the normal process that is followed in other purchases is expected. Of course, if you are buying planes for war, that is a different matter. But if you are purchasing beans for the quartermaster to distribute, surely that shouldn't be shrouded in that security secrecy.
Okay. The kind of information that you would be able to access, would you have use for it as an individual?
First of all, before I access that information, I must know what I want it for. And that is what determines the use. Because you can't just be accessing information and you don't have use for it. What would be the point? So the first question is, before you even want that information, you must be sure what are you going to use it for. Because then even the information you'll be looking now will be specific to what you're looking for. But if you're looking for all information and every piece of information, then you might end up getting overwhelmed with that information. So we must be sure, what information do I need and what for?
Do you think there's room for abuse of this information?
There has been, yes, and that is the fear. That is the fear. Remember what happened when the SIM registration thing came. Did you hear what the comments were about that? The feeling was that people will be prying into your privacy. So that fear is real.
You had mentioned the Public Accounts Committee. What are the measures that are in place to hold technocrats or politicians that are found to have abused public funds or misappropriation of funds or office?
Well, that is outside you know what committees do? Committees just recommend. And it's up to government to act on the recommendations. In some jurisdictions, they've given powers to the committee even to do arrests. Okay. Although in some cases they regret they did that, but in some jurisdictions they've given powers to the committee to actually make arrests or to make prosecutions if they find that it is a case is actually prosecutable. Or they would have a police officer sitting in the committee. But you can imagine what chaos that might cause, particularly here. If there's any mention of an abuse and the policemen rise to arrest. So the duty of the committee is just to recommend, but the action is dependent on the executive.
Okay, but from your knowledge, are you aware of any measures that have been put in place to deal with consequences?
No. Outside the committee system or outside parliament, it is hard for me to say.
Okay. And finally, what are your recommendations for the way forward on the access to information?
Yeah, that issue was dealt with by the committee. I mean, as a citizen or as, I don't know, but the committee's recommendation was that it must be expedited because we need it. But there was also a call on the people who need information to be responsible for the information they get. Because if you are going to get information to set your own country on fire, then you don't deserve it. So there's a responsibility on both sides, the recipients of information and the custodians. We all must be responsible.
Those are my questions. And we are done. Thank you very much for your time.